right. Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Thursday, October 7th, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's installment of C-Suite Snacks. I'm Steve Ronan, the leader of Citrin Cooperman's consulting and outsourcing practices, and the host of this webinar series. There are several management themes we hear from our clients in virtually every sector right now, and two of those themes focus on talent. It seems everywhere you look, on signs at restaurants and conversations with large manufacturers, small service firms, construction companies, or not-for-profits, and across virtually every business function, executives cite the ability to acquire the talent they need as one of their top challenges. Linked with this, salary negotiations have taken on a different dynamic. Executives who are going through annual compensation discussions mention increasing demands from their own employees. Recruiters talk about the across-the-board increases in expectations from the workforce. And it seems that regardless of whether you're talking about hourly work, salaried work, skilled, unskilled, and executive or staff, compensation trends are moving faster and more decisively than they have in recent memory. This has an impact on everything from being able to staff the company correctly, to forecasting the cash flow, and choosing which growth strategies to pursue. Today, we're joined by David Lewis. He is the CEO of OperationsInc, a human resources consulting practice, and a well-known subject matter expert on trending HR topics, particularly as they relate to the middle market. You've heard David on national radio, read his interviews in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and other national publications, and heard him on business television like CNBC. Today, he joins us to discuss how these topics are impacting companies like yours. As always, we ask you to submit questions throughout the webinar, so please locate the Q&A button on your Zoom screen and feel free to enter your questions as we go. We will be saving time at the end of today's discussion to address the questions we receive. We'll also be doing our weekly snack basket giveaway, where one lucky attendee from today's session will win a craft basket of snacks. The winner will be announced at the end of the webinar. Finally, if you're here because you found it on our website or through social media, I encourage you to sign up for our mailing list to make sure you receive an invite for our new snack-sized topics each week. Please also visit our C-Suite Snacks Content Hub on our website to view the recordings and look through the decks of prior presentations. And without further ado, David, thank you for being with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to go through a pretty rapid-fire presentation here on the slide deck, but hopefully one that's salient, and we'll hit the key points that you're seeking before we pivot back to Steve for your questions. So just briefly on us, OperationsInc is one of the largest HR consulting practices in the country. We're the largest in the state of Connecticut. We are going to celebrate our 21-year anniversary in January, supporting over 1,800 clients across 70 different industries. Because there's an insatiable appetite out there for HR, we are going through the largest growth spurt we've ever had in our company's history, with now over 120 HR professionals as part of a 140-person team. And we're deep subject matter experts on so many things within the workplace, and certainly have been at the forefront of everything and anything tied to what is now the new reality of the post-COVID workplace. If you want to, you can follow us on Twitter at OperationsInc or at David Lewis HR, or even both of them for that matter. So just sort of get to the heart of the matter, it's going to take about 5 or 10 years, I think, for us to have all of the books and the analysis that are necessary to answer a lot of really critical questions about how the world literally and figuratively has changed over the course of the COVID-19 and in the future. But here are some things that sort of the tea leaves are out there that are showing us. There's a report out there that I don't think a lot of people pay attention to unless you're really in the HR space, and that's called the JOLTS report. It tracks two things these days that are of note. One is the number of jobs that are posted on online posting boards, which has been going on since 2000, when the great pivot went from classified advertising to online boards. And the other is it tracks voluntary resignations, individuals who've decided to resign from their position versus those who were laid off or who were involuntarily terminated. The JOLTS report now for the last 3 months continues to show record numbers, 10.9 million jobs posted, and a 2.7% rate of resignation. These are record highs, and our prediction is that that report, which is about 2 months in arrears, is going to continue to grow. What that translates to for all of us is some significant difficulty and challenges as it relates to being able to attracting and retaining talent. Our interpretation of the report is that There are a lot of jobs out there at all levels, and it's not just the ones we see on Main Street where restaurants and service businesses are trying to hire, but white collar in particular is having an incredibly difficult time of finding people, more so than when unemployment was a full 2% below where it is right now. And if you follow the economists, there's a lot of speculation that we are now dealing with a new level, a new layer of full employment at 5.5 to 5.9% unemployment versus the 3.5% unemployment we were experiencing prior to COVID-19. The question is, what happened to those 2%? We've got some things that we'll touch on today, but it's going to take some time for us to sort all of that out. The other number I just highlighted is the number of people who are resigning voluntarily. There are a few things to attribute that to. One, unfortunately, is that women have left the workforce in abundance. We saw a huge number, almost 1 million resignations, or I should say exits out of the workforce by women in September of 2020. That number doesn't get reported here until November, but we do expect that that November report for the August-September timeframe is going to show an equal number of exits on the women in the workforce side. That is troubling and problematic. The other piece, which you can't ignore and is a bit morbid but is realistic, is we now have over 700,000 people who have died from COVID. How many of those people were active parts of our workforce before COVID? That is a question that, again, time will tell. So now we pivot back to sort of the drivers in the workplace. People are asking the question, where do I have to do my work from? And more importantly, if I have to come to the office, I'm inclined to look for employment elsewhere. And they can. They're finding other jobs elsewhere. They're finding other opportunities, and that creates the opportunity for individuals to leave. It is also creating some percentage of that 10.9 million jobs posted number in the form of companies who are trying to replace those who refuse to go back to the office for a variety of reasons. If they come in the office, they feel that there is a safety concern, but they're also dealing with other variables, safety through their commute, or if they're totally avoiding the commute. If you haven't already experienced it, given most of you are from the New York metro market, try getting in a car these days and traveling to and from New York, or for that matter, anywhere between Boston and New York these days. And you will find that the traffic patterns are completely unpredictable and seemingly are 24/7. And that's because there are so few people on the trains these days. I lament often that I drive past the New Canaan, Connecticut train station pretty much every day I come into my office. And that train station now is only filled 1 day a week. And it has nothing to do with commuters. It happens to be the location of the farmer's market for New Canaan. That's the only time you see that lot filled. Otherwise, as I saw this morning at 7:30, 80% of the spaces are empty. People are just not going to these major metro markets. That is going to have a significant impact on many of us who are trying to get our employees back in. That leaves us to sort of question about our strategies as it relates to recruiting in general. Aside from some of the things that you need to do to create the right environment and create an environment where employees want to come, want to stay, whether that's a virtual environment or an in-person environment, there are some other things of note that we want to touch on as it relates to recruiting in 2021. One is how recruiting has pivoted. For those of us who haven't been out there for a while looking for people, this is no longer a market where you can just successfully post a job and see a bevy of candidates walk in the door. That may return at a point that the job market starts to soften, but for now, candidates are expecting to be tapped on the shoulder, and not tapped on the shoulder by virtue of having to go to a website and see those jobs, but being told about those jobs. There are tools through sites like ZipRecruiter and Indeed, and even to some extent LinkedIn, that allow for candidates to be notified of your job being posted. But most candidates will tell you, especially in the white collar world, that they are getting their jobs and their job opportunities by being contacted by a recruiter, told about an opportunity. And that may be someone who works directly for the company or a headhunter. That is the way of the world. But the key source for all recruiting by far continues to be employee referral programs. When you do and take a look at surveys amongst HR leaders and talent professionals, you see a trend line that shows over 50% of positions filled from those people who are participating in a lot of surveys run by the likes of the Society of Human Resources Management and some of the job boards will tell you that employee referrals are the key way to go. And so companies have ratcheted those programs up, have incorporated additional contest layers on top of their usual programs in an effort to be able to find more people to come work for their organization, and it continues to work. But you can do the postings thing, but here's the other thing. Companies who are successful at doing recruiting these days have bolstered up their presence on their website, where the content on their career page is as marketing and sales centric as the content on their services page, meaning there is a sales and marketing angle in a big way to selling your company as a place for people to come to work, just as much as you are selling prospective customers on why they should buy your products or services. The organizations who are doing this well are focusing their attention on culture, on the stories of their employees, on what it's like to work in the organization, on benefits and things of that nature. A well-developed career page is a must if you are going to attract and retain talent in 2021 and beyond. There has been the temptation in a lot of organizations with whom we work, including our organization, have fallen into the mode of looking at candidates outside of commutable distance to our corporate offices in Norwalk, Connecticut. That has given us huge benefits because we have found more talent, a deeper talent pool, if you will, by looking nationally. But it also comes with its challenges. There are state compliance issues associated with that as an HR firm, we know what to do, but most organizations don't. Your first employee in Texas or Arizona or Iowa, or wherever you may be, also requires you to do things like update your employee handbook, and more importantly, update your understanding, your knowledge of what it's like to be an employer in those states, because you're going to have to comply on that front. And as the folks at Citrin Cooperman will tell you, the state tax issue is an absolute nightmare right now and headed to the Supreme Court, but it does have some guardrails out there already. You need to understand what your obligations are in terms of pulling back certain state taxes for individuals who are working physically out of their homes in other states where you don't have a significant or any type of office presence for that matter. So there are some issues there, and I'll just throw one other out that we are raising a red flag on with our clients, and that is the idea that once the dust settles, once things normalize, whatever that looks like, will all those people who are working 100% of the time for your company out of their homes start to long for the days of having an office environment? I have a significant concern for us, for my organization, and for our clients that too many people out there being hired in the field could wind up creating a problem down the road where you have more in the way of resignations of that population of people over time when they see that it's safer to go back to an office or a workplace, and they don't have that option because your office is based in Connecticut and they're based somewhere thousands of miles away from where you're based. Just food for thought. Lastly is compensation. So you've got some variables that are really messing with our ability to effectively manage our structures, our comp structures, and our hiring structures. There are new laws that have been put in place, some in the last year, some in the last month, that focus on things about not being able to ask salary history of the candidates you hire. This is very much tied to the focus of trying to ensure equity, specifically on a gender equity basis, and not allow someone who was paid inappropriately low on a lower level earlier in their career, having that essentially be a stain that holds them back from reaching comparable compensation levels to other individuals in your organization. So you're going to have circumstances where someone's making $80,000 a year right now, comes in, you don't know what they were making, and they ask you for $120,000. If they get it, great, and a lot of people are getting those salaries, but it is creating some havoc as it relates to comp levels, and candidates absolutely have the upper hand. But now we're looking at some other variables that are going to take a little bit of time to shake out, but definitely food for thought. One is the reality that, let's say 2023, just to give us a safe long runway here, people who come to the office are going to get paid more. People who work from home are going to get paid less. It may not mean that you cut salaries of those people who are working remotely that used to work in your office, although some organizations are starting to do that. But it does mean at the end of the day, there's going to be differential in pay. Because after all, someone who doesn't have the commute, doesn't have the tax burden potentially of a major metro market, doesn't necessarily warrant the same salary. Or more importantly, those people who do make those commutes and who do work in the office would like to know that they are being compensated differently than those who get the option or have been given the chance to work from home. There are stipends that are coming out and are being more consistently rooted now in the comp plans for home-based work. covering things like everything from furniture all the way to internet access. And then the last two quick things here, we're seeing a lot of companies struggle with being able to be competitive in the job market because candidates are coming back and asking for more than they can pay or asking for higher pay than it was originally offered because of counteroffers. One of the best tools we are advising clients to consider if they are capable of doing so is instead of continuously raising those salaries and creating internal equity issues amongst other employees with like positions, consider the sign-on bonus as a good get-out-of-jail-free card. It's costly. You can put a few strings on it if you want, including that the bonus is something you ask that the individual pay back in full if they don't continue their employment for a period of a year, although it is difficult in some cases to enforce that. But overall, paying someone that extra $5,000 or $10,000 in a sign-on bonus versus having their salary be starting off at $5,000 or $10,000 higher than you originally planned is, in our opinion, most of the time a better strategy, at least one to consider. And then lastly, ask what the candidate wants. The more you are openly asking your candidates that you're interviewing what they're seeking, not just in terms of comp, but just in terms of the workplace, the environment, and what they are hoping to achieve as far as coming to your organization, including things like remote work and flexibility, the more you're going to weed out some people who you just can't yield to those requests, the more you're going to migrate to those individuals whose requests match up with those that you have and that you want to provide. Our best advice: plan for the hiring process to be slow. It is taking approximately twice as long to fill positions these days as it was a year ago. Don't blow up again your current compensation plan as a result of your pursuit of new hires. Move quickly. Boy, I can't tell you how many times we are seeing companies lose the opportunity to hire people because their hiring process is slow. This is a competitive market. Early bird gets the worm here. And in this particular instance, companies need to really have a tight and rapid process that still gives them a chance to properly evaluate candidates, but also gives them a chance to make offers in a quick fashion. You go quick, you're going to hire more people. You go slow, you're not. Be prepared for counteroffers and have a plan for what you're going to do in the off chance that that happens, because the counteroffer activity level is off the charts right now. Companies desperate to not lose people and realizing how difficult the time they've had in trying to find additional resources are pulling the stops out and are breaking a lot of their own rules and paying people to stick around. And again, last thing is, if you have hiring approaches that result in bringing people in with less experience, because that's what you can find, remember how challenging it is to integrate individuals who need the kind of training and mentorship that was easy to do when we were all physically in one office, but is much more challenging in a remote environment. Those are your barriers, in my view, to entry. With that, I will throw it back to Steve and hopefully your questions.
Thanks so much, David. Wow, what a complicated environment to navigate for employers right now. It takes a lot more energy and thought than I think people were used to before. So really appreciate your insights. The out-of-market hires, very interesting. We've been doing a lot of that ourselves. As you mentioned, you guys have been doing it. We have clients who have never hired out-of-market before, who have done a significant amount of out-of-market hiring. And kind of everybody's now grappling with some of the inherent challenges to doing that. Are there any sort of onboarding or engagement tips that you have when you're hiring out-of-market people who may never really be on site in their tenure with you?
Yeah, so in no particular order, I think one of the things that's really helpful is to understand what type of experience the individual you're about to hire has had before COVID in working in a remote environment and in a fashion where they're sort of an island unto themselves. It's really helpful to understand that if you're going to be dealing with someone who's going to be adjusting on the fly, or if this is something that they're relatively used to and have done before. Second is to try and figure out how you pair and partner that person up with someone other than just their manager. A buddy system of sorts is absolutely critical. And if you consider how easy it is to get people integrated and get to know other coworkers in a physical environment, you have to figure out how to overcome that when you're dealing with someone who's remote. And especially if you've got a 5-person team, 4 of them are local and 1 of them is out wherever they are, how are you going to integrate them with those other 4 people? You need to impress upon those 4 people to basically say, hey, this is also your responsibility. We want this person to succeed. They need the connection and the connectivity with you. So I think that's ultimately critical. And then lastly, ask them to make sure that they make it clear where they're struggling and keep that communication up. Communication is just, really at the core of all of this. If you have a regular dialogue with that individual, and you make it part of sort of the routine, you'll help integrate them, get them more comfortable, and have them not be necessarily an outlier, but instead a collaborative part of your team.
And then from just a tactical perspective, are there other costs or challenges that companies who are doing a significant amount of out-of-market hiring that they should be considering?
The one thing that I think most people are sort of missing is that, you want people to have the right setup at home. That's great. And I've got some clients who've gone all the way to the route of saying, we want to get you the right chair, we want to get you the right desk, which is terrific. And I think the employees appreciate that. Those same clients are forgetting that we're not going to be sending moving trucks all around the country to stop at those people's homes upon their resignation or termination and pick all that stuff up. So you got to write some of those things off or anticipate writing some of those things off. Then you got to get into sort of the mode of, what's the acceptable level of internet access? What is it that you really want to outfit them with in terms of technology? How much, when we moved into this office that we've now been in almost 2 years, one of the big purchases was to expand our phone system. That phone system is now useless. It's worthless because for us, we've now moved to a system that's completely in the cloud. That's great, but a lot of companies are still dealing with typical voice over IP systems and such. Are you going to go ahead and provide that type of setup to somebody? And if so, do they have the technical know-how to be able to set those things up? You learn these things by setting remote teams up all the time. And the less you've done that, the more you're going to learn through that experience. Just do a good checklist, to do an understanding of what that remote setup looks like and get as much ahead of that as possible. I think you'll do better at managing those folks.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I just encourage everybody to use that Q&A window at the bottom. We've got a lot of good questions coming through, but we've got, we made sure to reserve time to answer everything that people were wondering about. So please use that to send your questions in. David, we have one on international candidates. What's the regulatory environment like right now? Has this talent shortage changed anything about hiring international candidates?
It really hasn't, and I think there's a lot of complexity associated with bringing people in from other countries because there is far more similarities than similarities as it relates to operating in another country as it relates to labor law and tax practices and things of that nature. So the tendency is to go ahead and hire individuals around the world and do so purely on a freelance basis, but I think you really need to question whether or not that truly is the best path for you, because while you may find some good talent out there, if you can find that talent in the US, you're going to save yourself a lot of heartache associated with how you are able to manage and control those individuals as a whole. You may not care about the time difference, for example, but you're giving up far more than I think you're getting when you do that. The best example I can give you on the flip side of that, but is not based on direct employment, it's based on indirect employment, is the classic case of doing so because the costs are so much less. But even there, going to countries like the Philippines or India, where you're going to find labor in some cases, not all, but in some cases to be less expensive, you're far better off finding a third party to help engage those individuals and manage them. Someone who understands the labor laws, understands the talent pool, and can do that far more easily, versus going ahead and trying to do it directly on your own.
And then what about as it relates to H1B candidates and other types of visa candidates? Any changes there?
Not yet, which is really interesting. I mean, listen, this administration has an extremely full plate, to say the least, and yet this is a big hot button issue. It's going to. I think the problem is that if the Congress was tilted far more so in Democrats' favor and it wasn't so threatened to become a Republican majority in both the House and the Senate come the midterms, I think you'd see a lot more movement in the direction of opening up the H1B valve a little bit more and more consistent with where it was during the Obama administration. But even though in my opinion, the concerns are unfounded and the idea that those people who would be allowed in would be taking jobs away from otherwise available talent in the US that's looking for that work, because the mismatch in talent right now is very clear. We don't have enough people to fill a lot of the jobs that people for H1B visas would be looking for. I don't think our political climate is going to support anything before 2023 in terms of allowing more visas to be issued. And that's unfortunate because spaces like tech in particular are going to continue to suffer. They're just not going to grow nearly as fast as they want to because they cannot find enough talent. We're just not churning enough talent out in that space in this country right now.
One more question on workforce, and then I'd like to swing over to some salary questions or comp questions. So the 2% increase in unemployment, can you speak a little bit to what that group is composed of? What are the work intentions of that group, demographics, different skills, and where it's concentrated, et cetera?
Yeah, if I get a time machine and go 5 years ahead, I could give a great answer to that question. It's a fascinating situation. I mean, let's just think about this for a second. 3-4 months ago, when states decided that they didn't like that there was still this $300 a week supplement kicking out by the federal government all the way through September, they decided to curtail that for that lowest portion of our workforce population in an effort to motivate those individuals they thought were sitting home collecting those checks to get back into the workforce. Well, now we're past that point where the federal government programs expired. It did so early in September. You are not seeing suddenly all of our restaurants reopen fully 7 days a week. You're not seeing them be able to serve all of us at every table. You are not seeing fast food restaurants improve on their service as a whole. That population has disappeared, and the question is, where have they gone? But as I said, you've got other factors that also show that 5.9%, which is where we are right now, 5.9% unemployment, seems to be about full employment in the country, which is an astonishing statement because that's a full 2.4% higher than where we were before COVID. And back then we thought we were at full employment. It's going to take a number of years for us to sort all of that out. One of the key variables for sure is that there is a large portion of the population, undetermined count, who just don't want to leave their homes and go to a place of work for fear of catching COVID or compromising their own health or that of the people with whom they live. And that's through the bus ride, through the subway ride, through public transportation, and or through dealing with the general public. All of these jobs that we're having a tough time filling are higher risk jobs. They are frontline worker type jobs that carry that higher risk. The question really is going to take years before we know exactly what happened here and where that labor force went.
So, David, let's cap it off with one last one on comp. So if we're looking to your point on the time machine, right? If we're looking forward 5 years ahead, what do you think the lasting changes on compensation are going to be that we're left with from this phase?
Yeah, so I do think that when you apply for jobs, you're going to get paid 10 to 15% more to come to an office on a regular basis. I think that's going to be key. And you can flip that around and say you're going to make 10 to 15% less if you're working from home. I think that the other comp pieces, depends on what we do now with broadband. We've got a major issue in this country right now. Broadband was mostly geared up and muscled up in major metro markets. That doesn't help us, for example, in various parts of Connecticut, where you don't have a major metro market and where we have bandwidth that's limited based on how many people are on the internet at any one time in a particular neighborhood. 100 people on there means you're dividing that pipe by 100. 5 people means you're dividing it by 5. We need far better systems in place. If you're going to see, I think now states and federal government bolster that, that's going to make a significant, at least, change to what's available. I think now companies are going to wind up spending more money on their employees operating remotely as in an effort to be able to give them more as far as ability to be effective and productive on a remote level. And then it's the tech side. Again, how much will companies have to spend on tech? If they can leverage what they have right now, comp pretty much, I think, stays the path it's on right now. If they have to spend a lot more money, then companies are going to even tilt it further. Come to the office, you get paid more. Work at home, you get paid less. That's my prediction.
And there we have it. So, David, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your insights on this topic. And I know how relevant it is for everybody who joined us. So thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure, Steve.
David and his firm do great work in these areas, in addition to all of the other human resources capabilities they have. So if you have further questions or want to understand more about their services, please reach out to him. The presentation and his contact information will be posted on our C-Suite Snacks portal within a couple of days. Today's snack basket winner is going to be Steve Croakey from Paradigm Precision. Steve, Congratulations. Hope you enjoy it. Somebody from our marketing team will reach out to get shipping information for you. And once again, thank you to everybody for joining us today. Please watch your email for upcoming invites and visit our C-Suite Snacks Hub for copies and recordings of today's presentation and our previous presentation. In the coming months, we have topics lined up that include financial management, forecasting and planning best practices, M&A activity, tax, and cybersecurity. We hope to see you there on those presentations and hope that you keep engaging with us and reaching out with any questions or additional topics that you're interested in. Folks, once again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for David. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you all real soon.